Thank you everyone for joining the Alzheimer's Society tonight. I'm your moderator, Chris Downey, and our guest speaker tonight is Alison Phinney. Alison is a professor and associate director of graduate programs in the School of Nursing at the University of British Columbia. She is also the co-director of the Center for Research on Personhood in Dementia. I'd like to take this time for a land acknowledgement. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improve our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home, and endeavor to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. You can find us on social media. We always have new content, so feel free to give us a follow. And please continue to check the Help for Dementia website for our upcoming webinars. A bit of housekeeping, this meeting is being recorded and the recording will be available on helpfordementia.ca, usually around noon tomorrow. During the presentation, we ask that you please have your microphone on mute. Questions are welcome at the end of the presentation, and you can add your questions to the chat anytime, or feel free to message me directly in the chat. And as always, we remind you that the information provided is not medical advice. And with that, I'd like to welcome our guest speaker, Alison.
And now I'm unmuted. Hello, everyone. Oh, it's lovely to see all your faces and names. And even after all these years doing it on Zoom, it still seems a little weird that we're connecting from our homes all across. So welcome. You've heard I'm a professor from UBC and director of the Center for Research on Personhood and Dementia. And I'm now the associate director, not of grad programs, but faculty development. So helping support all those wonderful faculty that are teaching new generations of nurses who are going to care for us as we're getting older. Now, what I need to do is share and hope that I can get this right. Okay. Here we go. I think this is the one. And if I can make it so everyone's seeing a full screen that has my title, right? Excellent. Okay, we practiced this half an hour ago, but I sometimes don't have a great memory. Okay. So you've done a land acknowledgement. I do want to say I'm speaking this evening from my home in Vancouver. And I live not very far from UBC. So this is a picture of UBC from the west looking east. And that building that we see in the foreground is the Museum of Anthropology, and the campus lies beyond that. And then I live just beyond campus, very near the mouth of the Fraser River. And all of this is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded land of the Musqueam people. Now, while I've been at UBC for quite some time, I also want to share that I actually come from Canada's East Coast, where my family has lived for many generations on the borderlands between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. I've just recently come back after having helped my dad celebrate his 85th birthday. This is also a place where the river meets the sea, and it is the land of the Mi'kmaq people. Now, I've been asked tonight to speak about social inclusion and dementia supportive communities. And it's really been, that subject has been at the core of my program of research for a long time. So I went looking for pictures, and this picture on the left is our team. I think the picture was taken in 2005. And then again, most recently, a group photo from 2023. So tonight I'm going to walk you through an overview of what we've been learning along the way, really just highlighting some key points from different projects we've done that speak in various ways to the importance of social connection. And with that is my promise to focus on practical strategies, community initiatives, and innovative approaches that are all about fostering inclusion and really supporting the quality of life for people affected by dementia. I always like to go back. Um, so I want to begin by taking you back to when I started as a brand new nurse in Montreal. I had studied at McGill in what was referred to as a generic or a generalist kind of program, meaning there was no particular area of specialization. And I remember meeting older people as part of my practice education in home care and in hospital, but I never really learned anything. Like there was no particular classroom learning that was in particular about this aspect of nursing, about caring for older people. But of course, when I started working at the Royal Victoria Hospital, I discovered that there were indeed many older people on that unit. I seem to recall, I think it was about 33 beds, and 6 of these were designated as what we now know, or what we now call alternate level of care. So these were older people with dementia waiting for nursing home beds to become available. And we had, as nurses, little to no guidance, I would say, about what they needed, other than making sure that their basic activities of daily living were satisfied. So eating, sleeping, grooming, supporting people's mobility and safety, that kind of thing. This is a picture of Pat. Pat was with us because she had fairly advanced dementia and no family to care for her. She had no language anymore, but she liked to walk the hallways of the hospital. So during my days at work, I would keep an eye on her. I'd make sure that she was dressed and that she was around for meals. She was very patient with me as I tried to figure out what she needed and like what she wanted. I think she taught me really a lot about watching and listening and not being afraid to ask questions. I learned to ask her, Pat, do you want orange juice or apple juice? I always asked, and she always had a preference. One day, I remember well, I had the opportunity to go with her as she walked. We were well staffed that day, and so I was allowed to take a little bit of time just to spend just with her. And I was curious. So I followed along as she left the unit and discovered to my great surprise that she had this whole social world outside those doors. She walked along the halls, she'd stop in and out of offices, she'd look at people's bookshelves, picked up pictures of their family. Everyone knew her. They'd say hello, she would nod and go on her way. I'd been so focused on my own work and really just so taken up with my own assumptions that I hadn't even considered the possibility that this woman had this whole kind of meaningful social world outside the unit. And realizing that really changed things for me. I thought about Pat and the relationship we had really in quite a different way moving forward. And in some ways, I suppose that this is really, this is a story about a young nurse learning something or other about what care really means. But I decided to share it because I suspect I'm not alone. There are assumptions we all have about dementia and what someone like Pat needs, someone who may not have language, whose memory is poor. And while thinking back, I don't think I framed it this way at the time, but thinking about it now, I think I was really very afraid. I wasn't really sure how to be with her. I didn't know what to say or how to say it. And really, I think I thought, how much difference did it really make anyway, as long as I was kind and more or less competent? I was doing my work, but I had been very afraid to make any real connection with her. And seeing the relationships that day that she had built for herself outside that unit really got me thinking. So I include this today. This is before the research that I'm going to share with you, because I think this idea about the importance of making connections was something that I learned in my work as a nurse. And though these 3 messages here, I learned that listening really matters. I learned to not be afraid to ask questions. And I learned to stay curious. So all of that ultimately led me back to graduate school, where I wanted to know kind of the answer to this question. What is it like to have dementia? I think I figured if I could answer it, at least a little bit, it would help me and others be a better nurse because we'd have more to go on. So the work that I did with my dissertation was really my first real venture into the world of research. Now, the kind of work that I do is very qualitative. That means I don't work so much with numbers or statistics, but rather I really work with people's stories and their experiences. In this first big project, I spent time with people living with dementia in their homes, in their communities. I remember I attended church, I went grocery shopping, we went on walks together. I would hear about people's day-to-day lives. And I recorded our conversations. I took notes describing our times together. And out of this work came several themes. So people, no surprise, talked about what it was like to be forgetful, to not be able to remember things as they had in the past. They talked about feeling disoriented, kind of uncertain about where they were and not recognizing familiar places. Daily life became more difficult, they told me. The things they'd always done, their usual activities, just took longer and they had to pay much more careful attention. And yet at the same time, there were people that were not always aware of these changes. So they knew that other people saw that they had problems, but they didn't always recognize it in themselves, which in itself, they said, was scary and confusing. And finally, this last theme, this idea that conversations don't always fall into place, was the piece that I learned about that was really all about people's social world and how when language failed them, it became more difficult to engage with others. So I have an example from the study findings. So this was a conversation I was having with a gentleman I called Jim. And he said, I used to sort of sit back and let it go, but now I have to concentrate. They may ask me a question, so I better listen and know what they're talking about. This just occurred to me, that they're talking to him and him. They're going to ask me, and I wouldn't even know what the subject is that they were discussing would be. So I just stand back and listen. I can't really join in here. I would sound kind of foolish if I say something that has no relation to what they've been talking about. So I asked him, you'd be worried that you would embarrass yourself? He said, yeah, or embarrass them too. They're friends. So I'm a little leery. The people in this study often had trouble finding the words to easily express themselves. Our conversations were interesting and took a lot of time. They realized that it took longer for them to really kind of formulate and articulate their thoughts and also realized that it was difficult for them to keep up with conversations. And the result of that was that people were quieter than they'd been in the past, and they found themselves withdrawing from social interaction. This was really an important finding, realizing the kind of hard work that was going on behind the scenes, realizing that people are interacting less, not because they're less interested or less invested in social connection, but they're doing that because it's a lot harder to do. And in this example, and there were many others like it, I heard about how it takes people more time. So we learned that just slowing things down, slowing down the pace of a conversation, for example, and being comfortable returning to previous topics, those kinds of things can go a long way to helping people with dementia remain engaged in social interaction. So that was the dissertation work. And that first study I did as a student not only helped us learn about symptom experiences, so how people with dementia perceive the problems they were facing. That was really my primary goal. That was the purpose of the work. But in the process of doing that work, we also learned that people with dementia could have very good quality of life when they had opportunities to be involved in activities that mattered to them, doing things that were important. And so this was back in 2000, and it seemed somehow to shock people to realize that life could be good if only we could figure out how to support each other in good ways. So the next stage of my work addressed this question: what is meaningful activity for people with dementia? This work is what really opened the floodgates. We had really, for a long time, been thinking about dementia purely as disability. And with this work, the goal was to really turn that idea on its ear and ask instead about ability, about capacity, and about the importance of doing things that are meaningful. Like this man, who was so excited to show my research assistant how he was cleaning the brush behind his house. It's a still from a video clip, and he had a 5-foot blade that he was swinging around, and really it mattered so much. Now, over the next 10 years or so, we've conducted, I think, 4 projects that all address this broad question of meaningful activity in various ways. So pull it all together, what did we learn? There were 3 things that seemed to matter more than anything. And one is physical activity. That is people wanting to stay active for as long as possible. So we heard a lot about walking and swimming and gardening, and especially outdoor activities seem to really matter. While we never set out in this work to look at creativity in the arts, it had not really occurred to me. When we looked at the data, a full third of the participants across all of these studies spontaneously talked about the importance of creative expression, whether this was something they'd always done or whether it was a new activity for them. Things like music, painting and drawing, craft work, photography, art, and imagination seems to play a really significant role in many people's lives. And finally, and most importantly for our discussion today, doing things with other people has been a consistent theme in all of this research. Being engaged in your own community, often through groups, through social and recreational groups, seems to be an enormously positive experience. And it intersects in interesting ways with all the others. So for example, physical activity is better when it's also a social activity. So doing physical activity with others. Now, I should note that all of this is based largely on our descriptive research. In other words, we weren't testing interventions. We weren't doing things and then seeing how well it worked, but rather we're simply asking, what are you doing in your life that's important to you? And it turns out that what people are doing are activities that we know have important benefit for health and well-being in general. There is ample evidence. Science tells us that all 3 of these things are good for your health. So it would seem that people with dementia in our research are choosing well. But if we want to look beyond those objective health benefits, what do they get out of it? What does it mean to them? Well, one thing is that it provides a sense of autonomy, of independence, and of agency, of being in charge of your life, of being able to do. So we heard in various ways people saying this kind of message that my brain is not so good, but my body still works. So my memory is bad, but I can still do things. This was really important. Having fun turns out to really matter. None of these things should surprise us, right? But pleasure and enjoyment was important to people. As one person said, I can express joy and happiness. I think he was talking about singing when he said this. It's one of the most wonderful things. And finally, activity, social activity especially, but also the others, really brings people a sense of being connected and belonging in their community. As one person said, you feel like you're wanted. Now, I did a community talk back in 2019. I went looking back through my slides. I was looking for a photo, and I'll show it to you in a moment. So in 2019, the talk was for the Burnaby Festival of Learning, where I suggested these recommendations for people living with dementia. So get your body moving and do it outdoors if at all possible. Find ways to express your imagination and hang out with other people, even if you're an introvert. And for sure, these are good ideas for all of us. But it can be hard to achieve, and it should not just be up to individuals and their families to figure it out for themselves. So this is the question here that signaled the next turn in my program of research. How can we organize our communities in such a way that there's opportunities like this for everyone? So this was the picture I was looking for. With that talk in 2019, I had gone on to share some examples of community innovations that I was starting to see. There weren't a lot, but there were some nice examples I wanted people to know about. And at that time, I compared it to mushrooms popping up here and there. And then I thought later, that's kind of a weird metaphor, and I dropped it soon afterwards. But lately, I've come back to that idea. You know, I've been reading those books like The Mother Tree and learning about the importance of mushrooms and fungal networks. These kinds of mushrooms are the fruit of a vast underground network. It's kind of invisible, but it sits in the soil, in forests and other plant communities. This mycorrhizal network is what connects individual plants together. It is what creates community. So in a research interview we did recently with a community partner, they said this: dementia is not a single person issue. It's a family, it's a neighborhood, it's a community issue. And I think that's exactly right. So I wanted to be doing research that could play more of a role in making that change that we wanted to see. And it would be change driven by people with dementia themselves and community leaders. So the next two projects that we've been doing really ran alongside each other. Now in one, the Flipping Stigma project, this was one where we use methods of participatory action research. We partnered with people with dementia to understand what it would mean to them to reduce stigma and promote social inclusion. The outcome of that project was an interactive online toolkit, flippingstigma.com. I'm not going to talk much about that project this evening, but I will leave you with the link to the resources, and we can talk about it later if there's time and anyone has any questions. But where I will focus in my remaining time, look at my watch here. I'm going to focus on this building capacity project, where we have used methods of asset-based community development. We've worked in partnership with community groups to build capacity, to make it easier for communities to support people with dementia to be involved in meaningful ways. Now, part of this work was something that we called Dementia Ventures, which was an initiative of Vancouver's Westside Seniors Hub, where community partners, who were mostly not-for-profit neighborhood-based groups, community partners worked with our research team and the Flipping Stigma Action Group of people with dementia. They came together to imagine and really realize new opportunities for social connection. This was important because we all knew, all of the people involved were well aware that there are more and more people with dementia living at home. They knew that their neighbors were often isolated and disconnected from their communities, and recognizing that this wasn't just a health system issue, and it certainly wasn't just a family issue. These groups wanted to do more to support their friends and neighbors, but at the same time, they were very hesitant and really uncertain about how to proceed. This was really grassroots work. As I said, it drew on principles of asset-based community development, which meant that we didn't come in with pre-established solutions, but rather drew on ideas and the existing strengths in the community. And over the life of the project, different groups created different programs that best fit in their unique context. So different kinds of memory cafes, bringing people together to connect, butterfly gardens, community dialogues, and others. Now, we did a developmental evaluation to learn what worked. And at the end of the project, our community, what is her title? Community Research Coordinator, Andrea, conducted interviews with everyone who'd been involved, with leaders of these community groups, with program staff, with volunteers, and with people with dementia themselves. And Sam, who is our knowledge translation specialist, she created a short documentary based on these interviews. The film, I'm going to show this to you in a minute, fingers crossed that we can get it to work. But the film that she made highlights the strengths that these groups have leveraged to really create possibilities for meaningful social connections for people affected by dementia, and what these groups have learned and what people with dementia have learned about how to put these ideas into action.
The role of UBC, not just of having the seed funding, but you all know we couldn't have done any of this without you.
It was about building relationships, letting people know the services we provide for our seniors, and also building awareness on caregiver respite and caregiver stress and how we can help.
When I first learned about the Dementia Ventures project, I thought this would be a very good opportunity to introduce this topic and to have a workshop on dementia that was in 2 languages, Mandarin and in English, at the same time. We're striving to be an intercultural church and a welcoming church to all people.
We have been working with the tablet lending program and the Happy Memories Cafe for a long time now. And our goal from the beginning was having this project in Spanish and in English. We wanted to have this special space for education, for socializing.
We were just trying to stimulate the community, and we needed to do outreach. And so we developed some accessibility guidelines of websites and media for people who have disabilities. And then we developed Hub Bite and the Sound Bites. The social media aspect was incredibly important because that got the designs out there. And then it came up that we could get something onto buses and get them up by summer when we knew there would be a lot of people on transit.
From the DRA, we had this wonderful vision of having a park program, and we got approval to start a small garden at Balaclava. And we had some of our local artists help and run workshops, and we're starting to add some outdoor movement, walking or Tai Chi and so on. It was nice to have different partners from the Seniors Hub join and come together and make new friendships. We're really trying to build those relationships to offer an indoor space during colder months, and then in the spring we could move back to the park.
During the summertime was the summer seniors outdoor activities. Everybody was invited. We had like exercise, arts class, music, these last 2 months, and the final day we had a celebration. The funding gave the opportunity for Kids House for the first time to get involved in dementia. We have the first training for the staff, basically focus on flipping stigma, and had the chance to discuss how Kids House can make better the programming, more inclusive and supportive.
At Kitsilano Community Center, people were really into it. They had a lot of ideas and suggestions. At the library and at the Ask Center, it made for good conversation and people were more willing to talk, and it worked really well. They can see that a person with a diagnosis isn't the stereotypical person that they think of that can't do anything anymore.
I think it was a bit of an eye-opener for some of the staff that these people are living quite well before they get to us.
If anything, the dementia workshops have opened the door, talking about the myth and just creating an opportunity, a safe place to talk.
The education part for people, I think that is what I've been hearing. That's the biggest impact right now, that people are learning about it, which also creates more awareness in the community.
The impact is they come to the center and the caregivers get a break. It's the most important thing. They get to recharge and do something for themselves. Sometimes we hear from families that once their client comes home, they are more talkative. They're sleeping better.
The gardening aspect of the butterfly program resonates with folks today. The impact, I think, was the realization of the magnitude of social isolation. Truly, there's many, many people who just want somebody to talk to, and how difficult it has become to do that. I would say we piloted a few different things and it was meaningful, but capacity becomes the issue every time.
Recruiting volunteers to carry on projects like this has its challenges. I think it's fear and stigma for this particular subject, I would guess. Another barrier is just the finances and the behind the scenes management. So any projects that go forward need to be funded. You can't rely on volunteers to do it all.
Also, recruiting people living with dementia, it's the most hard, but it's something we still need to learn, how to approach them to make them feel safe, comfortable enough to come to us and attend even individual meetings.
First of all, there is the stigma, right? And then the other thing too is that the care partner has to be on board with that person going to an organization like that. Because if they treat their loved one as being sick, the person's going to act sick.
We need more advocates amongst the people who are experiencing it. Get them out in the community, speaking to groups and telling their truths, because it doesn't matter what we say, it matters what they say.
From the prevention aspect, the education piece could happen much earlier. I would say one group that we still need to involve a lot more is the medical community. We've all collectively done work for reducing stigma or being able to talk about it. I don't see it translating, though, to doctors' offices.
The diagnosing doctor needs to be on board and the whole system has to be aware. The people need to know about opportunities right from the start with their diagnosis, even though they might not be ready to participate in anything, but the bug has to be put in their ear that there is a life after diagnosis and there are these opportunities to help society and participate.
Personally, the connection we have, like network with all partners, including the action group, how we can reduce the stigma, right, and outreach people. So without them, we wouldn't be able to do that. They are very supportive. What's next? I would love to dedicate one day from 9 to 4 at the Senior Center to our Happy Memories Cafe and have activities during all day for people living with dementia, companionship, relatives, and also have the same thing in Spanish.
For us, the biggest thing is that we have this bus rental service. So our goal is to make it affordable for other seniors organizations or nonprofits to have volunteer drivers to keep that cost down.
There's no doubt that it's been a passion project for many, and that's the reason to keep going. This is inspiring stuff, right? So building up outdoor programming is still going to be critical for a very long time, I suspect.
I've met so many great people who help form this experience. It makes a huge difference when you have an efficient team of people who you're working with. I'm just one little tiny person, but you've made a huge difference to many people. So thank you for making this a reality.
My hope is that everyone that's going to work with seniors to become familiar with flipping stigma. If everyone took the initiative to introduce the topic of stigma and bring the dialogue to the issue, we could do wonderful things.
My perception is now we're starting. We were building a plane and the plane is taking off now.
The role of UBC, not just of having the seed funding.
Ah. Whew. So the film, as you heard people's real voices, those were recordings from the interviews. And there were several key points that have come out in those interviews, and we heard it in the film. Even when people were not certain how to proceed, they saw a need and were ready for change. They were ready to do dementia support differently. This need to address stigma, realizing the stigma and fear that we all have, has been a really important step in this process. And getting there by working alongside people with dementia, following their leadership, has been, as it turns out, a really important catalyst. Vancouver, of course, is a very diverse city, and this work has been built up in different neighborhoods and different cultural communities. Building the capacity to work in people's own languages has been critical, and we heard that in the film about Spanish-speaking groups, about doing work in Chinese. And finally, we heard a lot too about the support offered by the UBC team. A large part of this was the support that we offered by way of, I would say, very small, very low barrier seed grants. It was not a lot of money, and we asked for virtually nothing in return, except an interview. That was important, and the connections and relationships that the research team helped foster were likewise very important. Here, we saw this too at the end of the film. This was all the groups that took part in Dementia Ventures. Now, since the film was completed, which is almost 2 years ago now, we obtained 2 more years of funding. So many of these groups, in fact, are still involved. The work has continued and it's expanded. We've had several new communities signing on with new ideas and new initiatives, many more people with dementia involved. The work, I would say, is now really starting to thrive. The plane has taken off and we're flying ahead. Now, As I come to a close, I just want to share a few more recent examples of the work that's happening. So we just have a sense of where this is going. The Purple Angels is a support and activity group for people living with dementia and their families. The group's founder and facilitator is a woman named Myrna Norman. She has been living with dementia herself for over 13 years. She saw a need and she went about doing something about it. They have been gathering twice a month in the common room of Myrna's senior complex for years. But recently, with some support from the Building Capacity Project, it has begun to really grow. There are now 2 more groups being added. They're meeting up to 6 times a month. It's really a thriving enterprise with a wide variety of activities, educational discussions. They go on outings and different seasonal celebrations like Oktoberfest, and as in this picture here, Christmas in July. The Dementia Co-Creation Academy is a brand new enterprise, just started less than a year ago. It was really the product of the imagination of 2 amazing people who brought experience they had had in the community senior sector in Burnaby, and they also brought experience doing asset-based community development in Tehran before moving to Canada over 10 years ago. They had lots of ideas. So using what I'd say is really a kind of memory cafe model, they say, intergenerational engagement in meaningful, fun, recreational, co-creative, therapeutic, artistic, and uplifting social activities. This photo, I think, was taken last summer at a pottery studio that had offered its space for 4 learning sessions. And you see all the people in this photo. They've got a lot of volunteers. Mostly these are people with dementia and their care partners. The groups that talked in the film about having trouble recruiting, Faryar and Farhad have not had that problem. It's just kind of exploded. And I borrowed this from their website. We are proudly and purposefully living well with dementia because we know, we connect, we belong, we create, we impact. We heard a bit in the film about the South Granville Senior Centre having taken on several programs and initiatives to support social connection for people with dementia. And the most notable, the one that's had has really taken root, is the Happy Memories Cafe. It's really been the most successful. And the idea there was to create a welcoming space where people with dementia and their families and companions could come together to socialize, to learn, to have fun together. It started during COVID, so it was online, but it has definitely grown since. People come together, they eat, they talk, they sing and they dance, and they create art. And last spring, the South Granville Senior Centre welcomed the local Latin community for their very first Spanish-speaking Happy Memories Cafe. It's happening once a month and has been, likewise, a real big success. This Memory Buddy program, Kitsilano Neighborhood House is growing a cohort of volunteers for this program. It's one that pairs community members, and they're focusing largely on young people, having them partner with people living with dementia. They would get together once or twice a week for an activity they both enjoy. These connections, they say, are all about creating new memories and relationships, but at the same time giving care partners some respite. And as you can see from the poster here, the idea is really all framed around this notion of friendship. It's about connecting and learning from each other. Volunteers need to bring compassion, empathy, and flexibility. And Kit's Neighborhood House, who is running this program, provides all the training. So take-home messages. To evaluate this work, we've been doing ongoing interviews with community partners to better understand what it takes to keep this kind of work going and growing to truly foster dementia inclusion at a community level. So first, the need to reframe dementia as a shared experience. It's important to understand it as a community issue not just an individual problem. And this was the quote that I shared earlier. It's not a single person issue. It's a family, a neighborhood. It's a community issue. Becoming more confident is really an important part of this. It's being able to develop dementia inclusive initiatives is a journey. It requires ongoing education and it requires interacting with people with dementia. One of our partners said, I know, and they presented this as new learning, as new confidence. I know how to talk to them, meaning people with dementia. And that's beautiful. It had opened doors for them. Centering joy. Programs need to focus on having fun, enjoyment, and celebration. As one person said, bringing some joy, creativity, and art is so important. Please don't make boring programs. And in the end, it's all about people, the people who are doing the work and the relationships that are building over time. These are the foundations, really, for the success that we're having in creating opportunities for people with dementia to be engaged, to be socially connected, to be included, and to be contributing to their communities in meaningful ways. One of the groups pointed out, and they were just amazed. They loved the idea that their drum therapist, who had become part of the program, had come to them through a connection with one of the group members living with dementia. So finally, I promised I would share some resources. The two main things are really coming from those last two projects. The Flipping Stigma Toolkit can be found at flippingstigma.com. And on that website, you will also find a link to the Flipping Dementia Stigma and Action Groups Guide, which is kind of the behind the scenes, how the work was done. And similarly, for building capacity, there are resources on the website, buildingcapacity.com. I would suggest that it's not quite as obvious where it is, but there is a link to something called the KT portfolio. It's really a catalog of all the knowledge translation products that we've created. All the resources are there in this lovely little catalog, and you can follow the links to find all of those. And we are currently working on an action guide for communities, for people with dementia, and families and companions to use to do this kind of work. It's in its so-called beta version. It will be released soon. And again, it will be on that website as soon as it's available. I think that's my last slide. So I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you very much, Alison. We'll open it up for questions if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask. We've also popped in the chat the resources that Alison provided.
Great, thanks. Hey, Howard, I'm looking at your comment and I'll read it for others who can't see it. You're so right. An observation. It shouldn't be surprising that activities that are important for people with dementia are the same activities important for us, physical, social, and creative. I don't mind admitting it was a few years ago. I was having dinner with a friend from high school. Hadn't seen her for years. I was telling her what I was doing. And she says, well, duh. Absolutely. Absolutely. It doesn't change. It does become more challenging. And having the courage to be able to, the courage and the skills to be able to walk alongside people who need more support, to do those things that matter to all of us, that's really where that's what's important.
Well, thanks so much, Alison. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to be here this evening.
Absolutely. And I can make the slides available for anyone that, should I just?
That's wonderful. if you'd like to do that, then we can include them when we post the recording, so people
Okay.
will have access.
Yeah,
to-
I can do that.
Would be great. Oh, Arlene, you have a question?
Yes, if I can. Alison, I know you talked a bit about stigma. I think stigma is such a barrier for all families and, of course, for people living with dementia.
Yeah.
And I know you talked about programs tonight, but if you had to give 3 things that each of us could do, 2 then, that each of us could do on this session to help break down the stigma, what would your recommendations be for all of us sitting here today to just help start breaking that stigma down so people don't have to be told that it's just the same activities you would like to do? Like, how can we help break those stigma?
Oh my goodness. If I were like, I'd be better prepared with 3 things right off the top, but I'll give you 3 things right off the top. I think one is not being afraid to talk to people about what's happening. So often in families, people don't want to address it because they don't want it to be so. And people speak in hushed tones. So finding some kind ways to ask people how they're doing and to be able to talk about what's happening. I think that's one thing. It's just making it something that we can talk about. Maybe that's just one thing. Maybe I'll stick with one thing. I think that's huge. And I speak as someone in a family that we were the very same. We found it very hard to talk about because it would make us sad, and we were afraid of it. But to be able to talk about it means that we can then do something, and help people stay engaged. I think so that's like a very practical thing for me. A lot of this for me has been about kind of getting my head around certain things. And I think one thing we need to get our head around is that people have a right to be involved in their communities. Like, who are we to say, well, like it seems like it's hard for you. We're worried for your safety, so you can't go anymore. You can't go to that group anymore. You can't come to our group because you make us feel uncomfortable. That's a big thing in seniors groups, right? I think turning it around and really thinking about this as a matter of human rights is really, really important. I think we need to do things. And we need those are the 2 things. Not being afraid to ask some questions and really thinking about how it's different when we think about this as a matter, it's someone's right to be involved. It isn't just, and I'm talking about myself here. It isn't just being kind and competent. Kind and caring is a good first step, but that it can't end there.
And I would just want to add, I think sometimes the language we use around dementia doesn't help. There's such a tragic talk when we talk about dementia instead of making, and I think to me that's another thing we could probably all do is change our language so it's a bit more inclusive, and we don't set people up to know that, oh, this is horrible and it's going to be tragic, because your videos didn't look horrible or tragic at all.
They actually look like we have a lot of fun. That's the secret. It is a lot of fun. And we can do this. Others have made the point that a generation ago, cancer was this. No one could talk about cancer. And it's true. Cancer hasn't gotten any easier. It still makes people sad. We're still afraid of it, but we can talk about it. It would seem odd to be keeping secrets and to be talking in hushed tones. So we can do this. We've done it before, and it makes a difference for people's quality of life.
Thanks, Alice.
Yeah.
Stephanie, did you have a question?
Oh, yes, I was not necessarily a question, but for those of you who may not be familiar with some of our programs, we do offer, as Alison spoke so much about, doing things that we enjoy and staying socially engaged and the importance of that physical activity, that the Alzheimer's Society does offer a really fantastic program called Minds in Motion that is available in different communities across across the province as well. We do offer an online program that people can join from anywhere. And there are some sessions coming up and starting. So a quick little debrief on what Minds in Motion is. It's meant for people living with dementia and their care partner, whether that be a family member or a friend, to enjoy doing things together, and it combines some of that physical activity, so some great fun exercise, as well for social and other opportunities and some cognitive games and things like that. So if that sounds like something that you'd be interested in, and I know Alison spoke a lot about the importance of those things, I will put a link in the chat, and please do reach out to us, and we'd be happy to get you more information on those programs.
Okay, that's great. Are there any other questions before we wrap up for the evening? Well, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. And thank you for taking time out of your day, and hopefully we'll see you at our next webinar in February. We've posted that in the chat as well. There's one coming up on safeguarding and financial fraud. So that'll be a really interesting topic we're looking forward to.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it should be really, really interesting. Thank you again, Alison, for taking time with us.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thanks, everyone. Take care and have a good night.